Okay, if I find the script, I'll call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. This is our regular meeting for Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Tim Hale will join us when he can. Stephanie Nowers.
Here.
George McKee.
Here.
Robert Yunt.
Here.
Moki Tu.
Here.
Jesse Sumner.
Here.
Tam Bovey.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Okay, let's take a look at the agenda. Anything members want to pull from the consent agenda to start with? Consent agenda. Okay, that's something new. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Mr. Brown, why don't you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You can see the minutes of the preceding meetings. Any changes to the minutes? We got three, a regular, a special, and a regular meeting. Hearing none, the minutes are approved as amended. We got some reports from the cities. Does the city of Wasilla want to report tonight, Mayor? You want to address the assembly? You just barely got here and we're making you work already.
Thank you. Mayor Halter, Borough Manager Brown, Assembly. Not much to report from Wasilla today. We have initiated the CARES Act 5. It's for PPE. So anybody, any business in the city of Wasilla can apply for PPE grants again. And also, just to make sure you know, and I'm sure you do, the AHFC has got plenty of money for rent and utility assistance. So get the info out to your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody have any questions?
Questions for the city of Wasilla? Looks like you're good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see anybody from the city of Palmer or city of Houston. How about the school district? We had a special meeting on school funding, part of this, and there was a lot of school folks here for that. How about Mr. Smolden? You want to talk for a few minutes?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Assembly. I wanted to come over for your meeting earlier, but fortunately, due to technology and COVID, I was able to watch your meeting on Facebook and also watch the slideshow from another meeting on Zoom. So I was multitasking, but it was a really interesting conversation and interesting to kind of listen to you all discuss some of the different options for school bond debt reimbursement. There were a couple of things that I remembered from your discussion. One of them being the idea of whether or not it's the state's obligation to pay for school bond debt reimbursement. I think that's an interesting discussion because while legally it is not subject to appropriation, as Assemblymember McKee pointed out, others can argue that there's kind of an ethical or an agreement there. So interesting discussion, but the reality is that the reality is what the reality is. And as someone pointed out, maybe Mr. McKee, it's a $2 billion deficit that the state is looking at. So anything that local businesses and our local governments can do to reduce costs and be more efficient is really going to be in their best interest. It's not just the Mat-Su, it's everywhere and it's everyone. So another question that came up was regarding new revenue sources. I think Assemblymember Nauer maybe asked, wished that perhaps the governor could give some indication on, whether there would be a sales tax or what have you, but really it's the legislature that passes legislation and the governor who signs it. So I think you'll have to see what the legislature puts forth in terms of new revenues. And that's, a question for Mr. Harris and your work with the legislature. So I would say this, that Mr. Brown's points about stability, I think, are very good points. At this point in our state, it doesn't matter whether you're a government official, an individual, builder, anyone an Alaskan, there is this psychological effect of not knowing what the state's fiscal situation is going to be. And so there has to be some work to a sustainable, predictable budget. And it's my job to stand here and laud my boss's policies and proposals, but even just as a citizen of Alaska, a spending limit gives you that predictability. And we also have learned that it can't be statutory. The legislature has proven, and granted every session there are different legislators there, but at least over the last few years, they've proven that statutes don't necessarily really matter when making decisions. So there is a different group there now. So hopefully everyone will be able to work together on some predictable, sustainable budget moving forward. And I know the governor is very interested in working with anyone and everyone who wants to have a discussion, conversation about that. So I imagine that some people might have questions about the emergency declaration, the lack thereof of the governor issuing a new emergency declaration. I think that I can probably pick a few things that some people might be wondering. So I do have a couple comments on that. I'm glad I looked at your agenda and saw that you were supposed to get out of here early. So I guess that means I can talk a little bit more. But I think one of the concerns, or let me start this way, that there are these misconceptions about what an emergency declaration is. An emergency declaration is like a driver's license that you give to a 16-year-old. Now, what that person does, what that person who has a driver's license does with that, you can go in entirely different directions. We've seen governors with emergency declarations that have completely closed down their states. We've seen others, like our governor, who for the most part has chosen limited restrictions as best as we could based on models that we saw and what people were predicting and our healthcare capacity and the fact that we're kind of on an island. So an emergency declaration by itself doesn't create mandates. It doesn't create lockdowns. Likewise, it doesn't mean that everything positive that was happening automatically disappears. There's still vaccines, there's still testing, there's still federal funding. In fact, I know a lot of people were questioned, does the federal funding go away? Do we qualify for federal funding? We've been anticipating that the legislature, because of a lack of organization in the House, that they weren't going to be able to address whether or not there would be an emergency declaration. So we've been working tirelessly on finding out what we can keep, what we can't keep. Commissioners have been calling their federal counterparts in terms of funding. To the best of our knowledge at this point, everything is still in place with the exception of the extra SNAP funding, which is food assistance that comes from the federal government. That doesn't mean SNAP is going away entirely, it's just the extra funds. And we're working on that to see if there's a fix for that. Basically, the emergency declaration going away changes what we're doing from, a health order to a recommendation based on best practices. And then we're also increasing testing availability. So actually anyone who comes into Alaska now, whether you're resident, non-resident, can get tested without charge. But we're also really encouraging people from the lower 48 to come to Alaska. Come to Alaska, get tested, see if you have COVID. If you don't, great, go out, play. I mean, if you think of a better place where people could escape the chaos and social distance, not at all. So anyway, I don't know if there are other questions, but I think, we're moving forward. The governor feels confident, comfortable. We've done a lot of work to make sure that we can continue doing what we're doing. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm happy to take them if you do.
Ms. Nowers?
You through the mayor. Thank you, Mr. Smolden. It's always good to have you here. Wasn't expecting the governor to necessarily have an answer on the sales versus income tax, but it'd be nice to know what he preferred, but I'm sure a lot of people are asking that. I'm just curious, I've been following the vaccinations out here, looking at the state website, and it looks like there's a lot of demand. As far as I can tell, over the last 3 days, there hasn't been occasional 1, 2, 3 that show up in the valley. And it looks like Anchorage is pretty tapped out too. Do you know when the next vaccine shipment is coming? Are you hearing anything on that for Alaska and specifically for Matsu or Anchorage?
No, through the mayor to Assemblymember Nauer, I have not heard about any problems with it or whether or not there's a delay. I know some people have asked about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which we're expecting probably beginning to mid-March that'll be available. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't heard of any problems really. I mean, I think we still are number 1 in vaccinations in the country per capita. And I think at this point about 26% of the population has been vaccinated, which is pretty incredible if you think about it, considering that not everybody wants to get vaccinated. So we're moving along well, but if you know of something that a shortage or something, I'd love to know about it. You could contact me.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have problems with it. I've just noted that if you wanted to get an appointment, and I've been looking at it the last 2 or 3 days, you would have a really tough time getting one in Anchorage or Matsu.
Okay.
Anybody else? Well, I got my second COVID shot today, so I'm very thankful.
My wife got her first one today, so.
Good. Okay, I guess we appreciate your dedication, Mr. Smolden, coming into all our meetings and dedication to the governor and the borough. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and feel free to reach out anytime if you need anything. Thanks.
Okay. Joint Assembly School Board Committee. I don't believe that's been meeting. Are there any other public relation reports? If not, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of brief updates tonight. We were going to have Elizabeth Ripley from the Matsu Health Foundation here tonight. She had an emergency come up, so she was unable to attend. The information that she was going to summarize or provide was provided in last week's manager's post on the Matsu Health Foundation's 2019 Community Health Needs Assessment. So the information that she was going to touch on and cover tonight was included in there, was intended to be provided to the Assembly as a read ahead for this week's upcoming strategic planning meeting. Also, we were going to have the comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR presentation tonight. That'll occur on March 2nd. So that'll be done under manager's comments at the next meeting, and BDO will be here to provide that presentation. And I was asked by a member to speak to the COVID and state emergency declaration. I appreciate Mr. Smolden speaking to that tonight. I wasn't aware he was going to do that, so that's really helpful, Todd. But our emergency management staff did meet with the state, and the state emergency management folks do believe the federal declaration will continue to provide the financial support that's needed So at this point, we're not expecting any impacts of that declaration expiring on terms of what we're doing here from a borough perspective. So we believe that the federal declaration, the Stafford Act, and the reimbursements that are available will continue to be available. So at this point, we don't foresee any major issues at the borough level with the state declaration expiring. And then lastly, on a more somber note, I did want to make the assembly and the public aware of, we had a loss of Chief Alan Buckwheat Sweat. He actually went by Buckwheat, as I understand it. He was affectionately known to his friends and colleagues. Chief Sweat was currently serving as a senior technical advisor to the West Lakes Fire Department and served previously as a battalion chief with the Central Matsu Fire Department. Chief Sweat has a lengthy tenure with DES. I believe he's served for in excess of 35 years. As a fire and rescue instructor to all area fire departments, greatly influencing many of our responders for generations to come. Chief Sweat passed away unexpectedly in the late evening a couple of nights ago while in Arizona. So we just wanted to make the public aware of that. Thank Chief Sweat for his service and just keep his family in your thoughts and prayers. That's all I have for tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Spropoulos.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, I'm going to take a break from the constitutional thing I've been going through and talk to you tonight a little bit about reapportionment. There's an IM before you tonight that talks about the staff's plan to start to work on reapportionment and bring you through. The clerk is actually the lead on that entire thing because it deals with reapportionment of assembly districts and voting rights. And as the chief election administrator, it falls on her. She works very closely with other staff, Ms. Graham, who's now in finance department, who was previously in planning. Obviously, GIS will be involved and law will as well. So I just wanted to go through a couple of things here. It'd help if I turn it on, yeah. So I want to talk just briefly about reapportionment. We're directed to reapportion by statute. And so the first statute that talks about is pretty basic. Apportionment shall be consistent with equal representation standards of the Constitution of the United States. As I talked to you last time, it wasn't until the early 60s this one man, one vote principle really became a bedrock of American law through the U.S. Supreme Court decisions. You'll see that Part C, Assembly may not provide for weighted voting, which means you can't have one Assembly member's vote work more than others, right? So somebody couldn't say, well, my vote counts for two. It's kind of intuitive at this point, but the other thing is it may not be elected or appointed by and from the council of the city. Remember last time we talked a little bit about what the original Alaska Constitution used to have, and to comply with equal representation standards that was taken not only out of the Constitution, there's actually a statute now prohibiting it. And so the composition and form of representation is directed by statute. And Part B says every 10 years when we have the redistricting plan adopted by the state, the Assembly has to decide what form of representation will be placed in front of the voters. And so the forms of representation the Assembly may submit are, and you shall, let me back up, shall propose and submit. So it's a mandatory statute that directs the Borough Assembly to put before the voters one of several different forms of representation. And this applies to all boroughs. Election at large, Fairbanks North Star Borough follows this. They have 9 Assembly members, they're elected at large. 2 is election of Assembly members by district, which is either you have to live in your district, but anybody can vote for you, that's A, or what we have, and that's 2B, election from districts accepted by the borough for the election of those Assembly members by district. And just a quick segue, this also applies to the school board seats. The school board seats are now by district as well. They mirror the Assembly districts. Again, equal representation standards dictate that that must be so. And then third would be election of members by both at large and by district. I'm not exactly sure how that would work because equal representation standards might make that impractical, but the statute then goes on and says, if you're going to have a form of representation by district, you have to have those districts mapped out and presented to the voters. So After the vote, the assembly has to adopt an ordinance provided for the composition of the assembly, the form of assembly representation, and the apportionment of assembly seats. Typically what we do is that's going to be in the ordinance that ultimately gets presented to you for approval to be put before the voters. It'll be a combination of maps and legal description describing the borough assembly districts, I believe, unless the clerk tells me no. And at the precincts, the maps are there. People can see them. They can see what the new districts and what the plan of apportionment will be. And so all this, if I can back up, shall be proposed and submitted at the regular election or a special election. And so it's a pretty tight time frame. I know staff will be working hard the next few months to get this done. And so the next statute talks about after the redistricting plan is adopted, the assembly submits at the next regular election the form of representation. However, it does say that if the plan is changed, or actually, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. This statute says that you can present the plan in any manner that's deemed appropriate. And so again, what the borough, I think, consistent with what happened in 2010, the plan is going to be to have it maps and in code legal descriptions. But legal descriptions are really hard for people to vote on, so we tend to have maps to go with it so that it adequately explains. And then this next one is if the final state redistricting plan as adopted gets changed at a later date through either court action or federal action, and the federal action could be a Voter Rights Act issue, then the assembly can change the apportionment plan. And I'll talk why this might be important later. You don't have to decide whether or not we're malapportioned or not. The assembly can simply decide to change the plan or amend the plan approved by the voters at a later time. And then the last couple parts of this statute are really deal with kind of midway through census. If you have a petition, the assembly must investigate whether we're malapportioned, and then must be submitted to the voters, must be within 6 months. And so the takeaways from all of these statutes are we must place a form of representation before the voters this November. To maintain the current form of representation, the ballot question must contain the proposed districts. But at a later time, the assembly may, without regard to those standards, change the plan. And the reason that's important is what happens is the borough is going to adopt a reapportionment plan before the state of Alaska Division of Elections draws their new precinct lines, most likely. Because the state of Alaska does not have an election this year. So the precinct lines are going to get redrawn sometime after the state districting plan is adopted before next year's election. And so why are precinct lines important? As the clerk will tell you, you can have a precinct that's split. And so part of the precinct would be in one assembly member's district, and part of the precinct would be in a different assembly member's district. So the part about being able to amend the lines at a later date becomes very, very important, because after the state then adopts their plan, the assembly can go back and quote unquote clean up the lines. It makes election administration easier. It greatly reduces the risk of voter confusion to make sure that people are getting the proper ballots depending on where they live. And it could potentially keep all your precincts in your assembly districts. So imagine two people living across the street from each other. They're in the same precinct, but they vote for different people. They go to the same polling place. And you can see how with absentee by mail ballots, early voting, and even poll voting, that could cause confusion. And so if you look back at what happened last 10 years ago, voters approved the reapportionment plan in 2011, the regular election, as directed by the statute. But then a couple years later, the amended reapportionment plan was presented to eliminate split precincts and keep lines for our local assembly clean, organized, not split by state precincts. I see Assemblymember Sumner.
Mr. Sumner?
So if I got this right, if 50 petitioners submit that they believe that there's a malapportionment, then that can trigger the assembly to look at it, or anytime the state changes district lines. And so I guess my question would be, what is the actual question put to the ballot if it's not a final district layout then?
Well, it would be final because the triggering event is let me back up actually to the first statute. The triggering event is no later than the first regular election that occurs after adoption of the final state redistricting plan. So as you heard from Mr. Harris, I believe it was last meeting or the meeting before, the state will have 90 days from the date of transmission of the data to adopt the plan. And then after that plan is adopted, the borough has until the next regular election to put that on. Now, again, we're already talking to the clerk about eventualities. If the data comes from DC late, and therefore it's, the state has the delay in adoption, we have deadlines that are set in our code. There is a potential for a special election to do this. There was a special election in, I forget when, I could look to the clerk,
2001,
2001.
or 2002, excuse me, January.
And I believe the voter turnout was pretty low. So the triggering event is the adoption of the state plan by the state board. The 50 voters petition, what it does is it would have the assembly investigate and make the determination as to whether or not the assembly believes it's malapportioned. If it is, then you put a new ballot question on.
Well, malapportionment, that'd be, what is the percentage to meet malapportionment? We have 100,000 people in the borough,
Right.
7
So
equal districts.
you divide by 7, your goal is to get to equal districts.
Right.
There are certain presumptions that arise out of cases, and it's somewhat of a misnomer to say less than 10% is okay, because it's not always okay. But all other things being equal, if you have more than a 10% deviation, there's going to be a presumption that you're malapportioned. Now, sometimes that can be defended. Sometimes it can't. So to say, well, if you're under, the opposite is not always true though. To say if you're under 10%, you're okay, you're not necessarily, it just means the presumption doesn't arise. Again, this is why there's, heavy GIS involvement. All the data sets come from the federal government and it's all mapped out. And, we do have to take into account very practical realities of, people living across rivers, communities. I believe we looked at municipal boundary lines. The standards are in the informational memorandum that are before you tonight to start to look at as the guidelines on how staff is going to proceed. But the goal is to be as equal as possible.
Madam Clerk?
I just wanted to clarify a little bit further when Mr. Spropoulos talked about precincts being split by assembly district lines. I do believe the last time there was one that was split by 3 different assembly district lines. It's not only that they're split, it means there's 2, they're depending on how many assembly districts are in that precinct, that means there are more than one ballot style in that precinct. And it can get confusing. And at this point in time, when we have, say you have Assembly District 7 up and Assembly District 5, but they share a precinct, in 1 year, Assembly District 7 has a ballot, but Assembly District 5 doesn't. So the Assembly District 5 people will come and say, well, I thought I voted here, where's my ballot? And we try to avoid those kind of confusion as much as possible.
So just to be clear, Mr. Spropoulos, so you have 7 districts and we had 110,000 people. That's about 15,700. Malapportionment, the error could be up to 158 people difference. That doesn't sound very good to me. 10%.
15,714. And so the presumption of malapportion will arise if you're above 10% deviation. So 10% deviation is 1,571 people. So you have one
Wow.
district, instead of being 15,714, would be 1,500 above that, while another district would be 1,500 below that. So you have a spread.
That's a pretty wide spread.
Yeah, well, that would then give presumption presumption of.
But you could go below that for,
Correct.
Yeah.
And the numbers won't, the assembly of city data is the numbers won't be exactly equal.
I understand that.
Registration amounts change back and forth. The goal is to get the population under.
Okay. Any other questions? Are you finished or you need more time?
No, that's it. I just
Okay.
wanted to give everybody just kind of a brief overview because you're gonna start seeing it.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Hale, welcome.
Yeah, I just want to let you know that I'm here.
Okay, we got you recorded in at 6:30 PM, Mr. Hale. Thank you for calling in. Okay, Madam Clerk?
The clerk's report is in your red folder. It also includes Saturday's agenda. So we do have that planning session Saturday at 10 at Wasilla Sports Complex. And that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, let's look at the citizens and other correspondence. Are there any comments on it? There are 6 different items. Hearing none, they are presented. Madam Clerk, let's read the IMs, please.
IM 21032, informing the Assembly of the process to reapportion Assembly districts based on 2020 census data. IM 21035, informing the Assembly of an agreement and amendments for the Community Assistance Program that are to be presented to the Borough Manager for signature. IM 21036, informing the Assembly that the Manager has signed an amendment of the Carnivorous Relief Fund grant. IM 21038, informing the Assembly of a need to change the December 15th, 2020 Assembly meeting minutes.
Okay, any comments on IMs? Hearing none, the IMs are presented as read by the clerk. We have reached public hearings. If you're present, please sign up in the back for each ordinance that you wish to speak to. Please, if you're calling in to testify telephonically, please hit *3 when you hear the public hearing you would like to speak to being read into the record. Madam Clerk, let's start with ordinance 21012.
An ordinance annexing parcels that are in the process of being subdivided from the Greater Palmer Consolidated Fire Service Area into the Central Mat-Su Fire Service Area to adhere to the provisions found in MSB 43-15049E, final plat, general provisions, and making the boundary changes to the MSB 5.25142A and 5.25140A, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's staff report.
Be me, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon?
That would be me.
Oh, go ahead, Madam Clerk.
No. Is this on this one? We had a petitioner come forward. He was in the middle of going through a platting process. And per borough code, when you are putting through a subdivision to get subdivided, you cannot have parcels be split by service area boundaries due to topographical constraints, having buildable land. There's, I think, 4 parcels within this subdivision that are split by Palmer Fire Service Area and Central Mat-Su Fire Service Area. So he's filled out a petition, he signed it, he met the standards for the petition. The properties were both, like I said, the properties are both in Central and Palmer Fire Service Area. What this legislation will do is move the properties that are currently within Palmer FSA into Central FSA. And the reason why that decision was made rather than the other way around is we did meet with both boards. The boards discussed it, and actually the property itself is closer to Central Fire Station. And I'm trying to remember the other thing I was going to tell you guys. Bear with me. And I do believe that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will open the public hearing at this time. We have a sign-up list. Mr. Cottle, were you going to speak to this? Or do you want to set it out? Okay. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this ordinance? Do we have any telephonics? No telephonics? Anybody wish to talk? All right, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Sumner, could you move this, please?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-012.
Any discussion or
Um,
debate?
I think it's pretty straightforward. I did meet with both Greater Palmer and Central, and there was some initial objections, but I don't think that there was any huge issue. I think it was more, of neither wanted to give up any portion of their FSA, but really at the end of the day, the property tax valuations wouldn't be there if this doesn't go forward anyway. So they're really only giving up what is presently like $400 of tax revenue. Initially it was going to be the other way around, but Central can respond faster. So to Central.
Any other discussion? Any objection to passing ordinance 2112? Mr. Hale, any objection to this ordinance?
No objection.
No objection from Mr. Hale. Seeing none here in the Assembly chambers. That legislation passes. Madam Clerk, ordinance 21015.
An ordinance adopting the 5-year timber harvest schedule, MSB 007621, 2021 to 2025, per MSB 232090.
Staff report. There we go, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly. My name is Emerson Kruger. I work in the Land Management Division. So I'm bringing forward a new 5-year timber harvest schedule. It's the borough's 4th schedule. The schedule lays out proposed 5 years worth of timber harvests. Borough code requires the schedule be updated every 3 years. The schedule was developed with input from the State Division of Forestry and local timber industry representatives. No surprises here. This is something that you're going to see the longer you're here. And it projects what we hope to sell as far as borough timber over the next 5 years.
Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you, Mr. Kruger. Oops, did Ms. Nowers? I didn't see you.
Through the mayor, I noticed that on page 5 of the timber harvest, it mentioned that sales were offered in 2017, 18, and 19, and that there have been no sales. And I was remembering we did have one sale to Charlie Nash. Was that separate from those sales, the Chijuk?
Through the mayor, the last commercial timber harvest sale that the borough had was in 2014, and it was a unit in the Sheep Creek area up in Willow. The Chijuk timber sale was kind of a special animal. There was an exception provided in borough code for a timber sale in Chijuk. There was a contract inked for that timber sale to take place, and the contract was closed before any timber was cut. So the sale didn't happen, although a timber sale contract was in place.
Okay, and that Chijuk one is in litigation currently, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just have a comment. I really appreciate the work that went into this and the effort to try to find some interest in the sales and a recognition that maybe we do not have the most desirable timber. And I would just note when we're talking about development like West Susitna or other things, when we put that we're opening up for timber, that we are just clear-eyed about where the market is at on that. And that's nothing against any project, but I just want to be clear-eyed about the market and not dreaming that something is there that is not.
We'll get ample time to debate this after we,
Yes, sir.
okay, later. So anything else on the staff report? Otherwise, thank you, Mr. Kruger.
Thank you.
I'll open the public hearing at this time. I don't think we have a sign-up list back there. Do we have any telephonics on this ordinance? Mr. Haberman, did you want to speak? Okay.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Metro Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. I'll be speaking on this issue. And I have a long history of attending meetings. With respect, I strongly encourage you not to pass this proposal here. And I would like to bring in the past history of the borough, the mismanagement in dealing with the issue of timber cutting. This room before COVID, when this issue was addressed before, was filled with many people, particularly from the district, from Assemblymember Bovey's district, who traveled long distances of concern on how the harvesting was being done to their area and how they were affected. They're not here tonight. I suspect the key reason is not that they're happy with this proposal, but with COVID, that's one reason. It's troubling. But there's another issue. I'd like to bring out the response to your decision on that previous time when you addressed it. They traveled long distances. They were really involved and concerned, and they addressed you. But you basically looked the other way. And these people went home and says, what is the use? What is the use? Why do we have to travel all the way to address you if you're going to continue to do the same thing, ignore their concerns? You have this proposal, and I strongly encourage you not to pass this thing. I strongly encourage you to question, particularly what was the past history of how the same parties who were involved with this with the borough are the same parties today involved with the same proposal here today. So with all due respect, with 1 minute and 7 seconds left, wow, I really moved on this thing. But I don't think I can say anything more, but maybe a little note that deals with this thing. I attend a lot of meetings. I go back many years, as many of you know. Some of you, by the way, don't go that far. Okay? So Mayor is present most of the years that I've been present here. And I remember in reference, because one of the parties that is the presenter, Emerson Kruger, respectfully, was when you had the joint assembly, Anchor Assembly and Borough Assembly meeting, and a meeting jointly in a committee, another place out in Anchorage. I called up and asked, and the one who answered was Emerson Kruger. And he says, don't let anyone know about it. There's only about half a dozen seats available. Now we've got, and then frequently when I address the meeting to the planning commission, I would frequently see when I come up, he leaves. You've got a proposal from a party who disappears when public comment is being addressed. Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? It's our update to the 5-year timber sale plan. It's required by code. Any telephonics? No telephonics. I will close the public hearing at this time. Assemblymember Bovee, could you move this for us?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-015, and I'd like to speak to it, please.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to thank staff. There were some changes made to this plan based on public comment. I think this is important for my district in particular, not just for potential revenue raise, but also the necessity of having healthy forests and for future fire mitigation. So I urge your support.
Anyone else? Any further discussion? Any objection to passing that ordinance? Mr. Hale, do you have any objection to passing?
No objection.
Seeing none here in the chamber, that ordinance passes. Madam Clerk, what do we have next? Ordinance 21016.
An ordinance to accept and appropriate COVID-19 disaster relief funds of $118,483.05 from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and $39,494.34 from the Alaska State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management to Fund 445, project number 55029, with accompanying resolution 2111, a resolution approving the scope of work and budget for COVID-19 disaster relief funds, project number 55029. If you're on the phone and would like to speak to this, press *3.
Staff report?
Cheyenne Heindel, Finance Director, through the mayor to the assembly. This money that we're accepting and appropriating is FEMA money to reimburse the borough for costs incurred dealing with the pandemic this last year. Those costs involve not only supplies and materials, but also wages for staff.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I'll open the public hearing at this time. Do we have a no sign up list? Anybody in the audience wish to speak on ordinance 21016 and the resolution 21011? Mr. Haberman.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. This is noted accepting monies from the feds dealing with COVID issues. Can't help but notice in their line in there, it notes the state emergency on COVID. Needs to be a change on here. That's expired. It's non-existent, the state declaration emergency, the state. Makes strong reference to it. Makes strong reference to the feds coming money, dealing with money. But the state's involvement is basically moving a different direction. So what I have to say to this is, and briefly, in summation, is I continue to be disappointed, but not surprised. Here you go in, and on the issue of accepting federal money, dealing with COVID, which is affecting people in our state, in our country, and around the world. It's an emergency situation, and our state's moved a different direction, in particular our governor. And you're going ahead and looking and says, oh, yeah, federal money. But I remind you also that declaration that didn't get continued, there was federal money in that. And because of not continuing that declaration, there's federal money that's coming to the state that affects Valley people as well. So here you're going to accept federal money, but the fact is, or you're deciding to accept federal money, the fact is, what are you doing to help the situation besides accepting federal money? There's a mask requirement in this room, but I constantly see, particularly the borough manager in the last meeting, almost hardly wear the mask at all. And I like to say the assembly in Anchorage, they wear the mask the entire time when they're speaking, with all respect, and their staff. So taking federal money, which I don't question you, the right to take federal money, we need the federal money. But at the same time, we all need to do the right thing and stop confusing freedom with responsibility, and at least wear a face covering. And just another note, and respectfully, you're having a meeting out in Menard Center. This is a large room. You need to change it to this large room and not be in a small room. That's not the way to go for that Saturday meeting. Thank you very much, with 21 seconds to spare.
We'll credit you with that. Thank you. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this ordinance? Income and COVID money with the allocation? Any telephonics? Okay, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Ms. Bovee, could you move that for us?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-016 and resolution 21-011.
Any discussion? Any objection by any assembly member? Mr. Hale, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, seeing no objection from Mr. Hale, that legislation passes. Madam Clerk, ordinance 21017.
An ordinance amending MSB 1760 conditional uses to change the applicability and standards for cultivation facilities and address on-site consumption of marijuana.
Okay, who's doing our staff report?
So, Mr. Mayor, Alex Strawn, our planning
Okay.
director, should be online. He'll be doing the staff report. He's
Yes,
on-
I'm online. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So go ahead, Mr. Strawn.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly. Alex Strawn, Planning Director. This ordinance does quite a bit, and I'm going to cover the four main things that it does and try to be as brief as possible while going into a little bit of detail. First thing, it modifies Chapter 1760 of our zoning code, which is our conditional uses section. It's all dealing with marijuana-related items. It establishes set hours of operation, which was a request by the Planning Commission, where they had, I think, sort of inadvertently set unequal standards for hours of operation on similarly situated marijuana retail facilities. And so they requested that we have sort of a standard that goes before them that they'll only deviate from if there's sort of extraordinary circumstances. And so the Planning Commission, in their two resolutions they adopted, did support that portion of this ordinance. This ordinance also addresses on-site consumption, the land use impacts associated with it that are not covered by the state of Alaska. So in 2018, the state of Alaska legalized on-site consumption of marijuana as an endorsement of a retail facility. And so what staff did is go look at the requirements that they have, which are fairly rigorous, but looked at what sort of land use impacts might be associated with on-site consumption that are not addressed by state law. And the things that we came up with was potential for additional parking. So we added more robust parking standards because you're looking at more prolonged stays as well as potentially extra patronage to these facilities. We require a loitering plan because you're dealing with people that are likely going to be intoxicated. And so you have some of those same impacts that, say, bars might have. And so we want to make sure that there's a plan to deal with loitering out in the parking lot and things like that that might come with these. And then also the potential for passerbys to either inadvertently or intentionally inhale secondhand smoke. We require setback for outdoor on-site consumption facilities. And the Planning Commission really didn't address those standards specifically. They actually had a sort of blanket statement sort of opposing the borough allowing on-site consumption in the borough. So if that's something the Assembly wants to look at in the future, they can. This takes cultivation facilities and turns them into an administrative permit and takes away the more discretionary standards, such as keeping in character the surrounding community, some requirements for landscaping and things like that. The logic behind that being that cultivation facilities have very little land use impact as far as they don't produce a lot of traffic, they don't have garish signage, they don't have a lot of noise associated with them. The big land use impact that they have is emission of odor, and the borough does not specifically regulate that, but we have instituted a 100-foot setback from lot lines, which is sort of an inherent protection for odor. And so the idea being that instead of going to the Planning Commission, the director could still put out for public notification and hold a public hearing, but without those discretionary standards could be handled by the director. Finally, this ordinance eliminates the exemption for limited cultivation facilities, meaning cultivation facilities that are less than 500 square feet under cultivation. And so the state of Alaska has all the same requirements for limited cultivation facilities, except there's a smaller renewal fee every year. So there's still pretty robust protections in place. However, this would make it so that the borough is in the business of regulating these things, ensuring that they have setbacks from property lines, setbacks from schools. It would be, we've identified, I think there's around 80 permits that have, or not permits, but limited cultivation licenses that the state has issued over the past several years, averaging around 20 per year. And so that would be, as you'll see in the informational memorandum, I'd include a fiscal note. If we do adopt this portion of the code and want to maintain the same level of service, it would require an additional position. If we were to not fund an additional position with this, we could absorb that. However, you'd be looking at longer timeframes for processing of other types of permits, such as towers and gravel pits and things like that. It'd go from probably, my guess would be from 2 to 3 months to more like 6 months if we were to not fund an additional position. And the Planning Commission did recommend eliminating the exemption for limited cultivation facilities. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Questions? I don't think we have any. Thank you, Director Strawn. Appreciate the report. I will
You bet.
open the public hearing at this time. We do have a sign-up list. Nick Miller is first.
Thank you. I did submit written comment as well. I hope everyone here received it. So, thank you. Go ahead. Sorry. Nick Miller, for the record. I'm here to speak in opposition to the proposed ordinance as it relates to cultivation facilities. I own a building in the valley, I own property, and I own a limited cultivation. I have photos of that building if anyone's interested. The building has been there probably since 2008, 2010, long before cannabis was even legal. I could have opened any business, purposed that building for almost anything, and wouldn't had to have done anything to the building. I wouldn't have had to come to the borough for any permits. But because I own a cultivation or operate a cultivation, compatibility with the surrounding area is now a question. The building is 60 by 80 and has a mezzanine that's approximately 1,400 square feet. The mezzanine is licensed for limited cultivation at this time. The cultivation has been in operation since 2017, and to my knowledge, I have not received one complaint from my neighbors. The outside of the building has not changed since it was built, other than we added cameras, obviously, for security purposes. At some point, we'd like to expand the license for the facility to a standard cultivation so we can add more plants to the mezzanine area. I currently have four full-time employees, and being a limited cultivation really makes it tough sometimes to pay the bills every month. It's not a matter of resources, will, or desire that keeps us from expanding, but rather the setbacks, the 100-foot from the side and rear lot lines. I do not understand how a building setback could become a problem when all the activities associated with the cultivation are done inside and out of view from the public. The cultivation facility is the only cannabis business, I believe, right now that is subject to these setbacks. I'm sure there are other buildings in the borough that are empty and poor repair and could be remodeled and used for cultivation purposes. The investments made in these properties would increase property values, taxes, and provide more job opportunities for residents. But people can't use the buildings because of the setbacks. They seem arbitrary. Odor is odor. If you're getting odor outside of a building, then you need to do something to fix it. 100-foot, 500-foot is not going to stop that. So the other issue I'd like the assembly to address is the 1,000-foot setback from schools and how it's measured. The state has adopted a 500-foot separation distance and measures it using public rights-of-way. The borough's requirement is 1,000 feet and is measured from the building the cultivation is located in to the property line of the school as the crow flies. When you consider the size of the lots the school are on, and cultivation facilities are typically just in a plain old building with no signs or advertising, the increased distance does not seem to increase public health or safety. I am here to ask the assembly not to approve the ordinances as drafted, remove the setback requirements in 1760-160, and match the state's 500-foot separation distance. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Viera. Okay. So we'll mark you off. There you go. Any telephonics? One telephonic, so go ahead on the telephone, please.
Hello, this is Andrew Campbell. I am a limited cultivation owner. I have the same concerns Nick Miller has, pretty much verbatim. We have no complaints from our neighbors. We keep a very low profile. The unique issue I have with the building that I currently operate in is that it's approximately 50 feet from a property line. The property that the cultivation is located on, the adjacent property right next to it, that is close to the 50-foot line, is actually the same owner. So if you took the property line out, the building is actually located in the center of this 15-acre parcel. So my question is, or not really a question, I would just say that, doing these sort of things, would definitely be detrimental to, our business. And again, running a limited cultivation is very, you have to run a really tight ship because there's not a lot of profit margin. So that's about all I have to say. Any questions?
Nope, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other telephonic? Okay, we've got the next caller, please. Hello, we're waiting for telephonic. Next caller.
You hear me?
Yes, go ahead. State your name and.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Thank you for allowing me to testify tonight, Mr. Mayor and Assembly members. My name is Noelle Crowley Bell. I'm a 20-year homeowner, parent, and resident of Clerk. Thank you for the opportunity to speak as a private citizen against the portion of Ordinance 21017, which seeks to provide on-site consumption of marijuana. I believe the MAP 2 was clear in initially preventing on-site consumption of marijuana within the MAP 2. I believe that was for good reasons, namely that currently no tools exist to test the levels of impairment, although we know impairment happens. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration actually recommends not driving for at least 3 hours after smoking marijuana. As a state, we worked long and hard to pass a statewide smoke-free workplace law to protect the health of all Alaska workers. Allowing on-site consumption of marijuana will expose the public and workers to the harmful health impacts of secondhand marijuana smoke, which contains many of the same chemicals as secondhand tobacco smoke, including those linked to cancer. It's important to note that the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineering, an organization which is responsible for developing ventilation systems, has established that currently no ventilation systems exist which are capable to remove these small unseen health harm particulates. In closing, I wanted again to applaud the Mat-Su Borough's Planning Commission's consideration of this very matter and its decision to amend the resolution PC 2045 to read, and I quote, "Be it further resolved that the Matanuska Borough Planning Commission recommends prohibition of on-site consumption." Oddly, I find the ordinance before you is almost word for word the one voted down by your own Planning Commission. Respectfully, I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Next telephonic caller, please.
Yeah, hello, Mat-Su Borough Assembly. This is Kirby Coman, last name Coman. I'm speaking in opposition to this ordinance. I would ask that Assembly Member Jesse Sumner not be able to vote in this ordinance, seeing as how he owns lots directly adjacent to license underway for limited cultivation. I feel that it's unlikely that he'll be impartial to this decision, so I would ask that he's able to vote on this ordinance. I would like to speak on my opposition for the ordinance as a whole. If you guys decide, I really feel that this should be split into two different ordinances. One should really be relevant to the retail store hours of operation, setting a standard for that. And then there should be a separate ordinance written to address the cultivation end. I would be against both of those as a whole. I think that limited cultivations have very minor impact as it comes to homeowners and the neighborhood. I think that the limited cultivation model, it's 500 square feet or less under cultivation, which allows the little guy, small businesses to start and flourish if they're able to craft their crop to be able to keep up with the competitors. I currently operate 3 limited cultivations here in the Massey Borough. I've not received one complaint of smell, odor, any kind of code violation, anything of that sort. And I feel that it's good for the economy. It brings in tax revenue for the state, and people within the borough like to buy local. And so not only that, but on the retail level, it also generates tax revenue for the borough on the sales end. I feel that the setbacks that are in this ordinance are arbitrary for very good reasons. That, I mean, there's no harm being done within these cultivations or around them. It's not a matter of public safety. It's not a matter of, I really feel that in reality, it's just unneeded prohibition. And I feel that if you guys were to vote on this, once again, I would ask that we do split these into 2. I'm against the standard hours of operation. The state has set out standard hours of operation for marijuana businesses as a whole. And I feel that the borough would be perfectly fine with public safety, and there would be no reason that they should set standard for retails within the hours of midnight to 8 a.m. So with that, I thank you for your time, and thank you for considering it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sumner?
Mr. Mayor, could I just address that real quick, since it was a specific allegation about?
Yeah, let's take the rest of the public hearing testimony, then we'll talk to Mr. Spropoulos too, and you can have your time. Next, telephonic, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Joe McEnany calling. I own a retail store in Talkeetna, and I would like to echo what Kirby had stated. I had attended the last planning commission meeting that addressed this ordinance, and then ultimately sent it back to the assembly, where the conversation there was exactly that, where there was too much going on in this ordinance. There's 2 totally separate topics with a lot of changes and proposed things that have a lot of bearing on these businesses and how they'll operate in the future. And it seems like there's not even a chance to have 3 minutes to speak to everything at once. Therefore, if it was split into 2 different ordinances and enough public comment was able to be had on the individual topics, I believe the assembly and or the planning commission could make the right decisions regarding these proposed rules for how these businesses are going to be regulated in the future. Speaking to the cultivation specifically, it's as a retailer, I purchase and have purchased cannabis from well over 50 different cultivators in the 4 years I've been in business. And a lot of the limited cultivators are husband and wife, family, father and son, mother, daughter operations that are literally, they've been able to change their life by becoming self-employed or having a side business. And they've done it in their garage or their shop or, an ATCO in the back in their lot. And to impose a 100-foot setback for these businesses would ultimately make it where it would be near impossible without new construction in the future for these future businesses. 100 feet off a lot line is a lot, and a lot of people don't own lots that large. As you've heard, there's been little complaints. The state's very big on controlling odor mitigation, and they will penalize and fine people without question that have that aren't properly mitigating odor. So I think, and then to the fiscal point that Mr. Sharon brought up, it seems ridiculous that you guys would employ a full-time person and or delay the gravel pits or other businesses and their permitting process just so you can regulate these tiny businesses from being in existence. So I think that would be a pretty clear, you should just throw that one out because it's been fine for 4 years in the state and there's been no issues with these license types. And then in terms of on-site consumption, I have a big issue with the parking requirements. Being in Talkeetna, we have a lot of tourists that come through or in the future, hopefully they come back. And the state put on-site consumption in place to give out-of-state tourists, primarily places to consume safely and not break the law, since you cannot consume if you're not in private property. If these parking requirements were to go in, a business like mine wouldn't even have a chance to even apply due to the level of parking requirements. It would just make a lot have to be very large to be able to fit parking and fit the building size to house those things. Also, with COVID, I don't think there's been on-site consumption licenses approved at the state, and none of the businesses have even opened. I don't think you'll see any of those opening anytime soon due to an on-site consumption facility where cannabis is being consumed in close quarters is not necessarily a smart move for a business during a pandemic. But I would hope that you could break the ordinance into two and allow more public comment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. More telephonics? Next telephonic caller, please.
Hi, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
We're here. Go
thank
ahead.
you.
State your name.
Okay, my name's Sam Hansen. The only things that the Matsu Borough Code requires for standard cultivation facilities that AMCO does not require in their application are your lot line setback and 1,000-foot school setback. Limited and standard facility applications are exactly the same except for their size of a facility. These limiteds are currently operating in less than 35 feet from our lot line. Several are in residential subdivisions where the lots are all less than half an acre, and you can find them located in houses, garages, outbuildings, hangars, and connexes. They harvest an average of 60 times a year and produce odor that can reach over 500 feet. It enters our home through our windows and doors and engulfs our property when we're out there in our yard. Many residents don't even know that they can complain to AMCO. Alaska's regulations state that odor will not leave the facility. James Holscher, the enforcement director at AMCO, shared with me that he met with our planning department at the borough in February of 2020, asking for their existence and enforcing odor. He was told that they couldn't help. He met with the troopers for their help, but the troopers never showed up when they were called. Over 100 odor complaints during 14 months were submitted to AMCO when reviewing a limited facility which was located on a 2-acre lot. Even with the documentation from these complaints, they were approved and deemed in compliance. Over the last 5.5 months, the same residents are experiencing odor and calling in complaints. The owner of this specific residential lot does not live in Alaska. The cultivation facility is licensed to a residence in Eagle River. The Northwest Community Council letter, 2 separate residential petitions, and many letters of objection were not enough to stop the limited license from operating 60 feet from the school lot line. Are you getting noise?
Yes, we do. We do hear the noise through the phone line. We do.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know if I should try again later.
Well, go ahead.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm sorry. The North Lake Community Council letter, 2 separate residential petitions, and many letters of objections were not enough to stop a limited license from operating 60 feet from a school lot line. We do not have a strong enough voice without you. The planning at California, Sonoma County considered establishing a 10-acre lot requirement. They stated that the current 300-foot setback from residences and businesses was not adequate to protect the neighbors from impact. They're suggesting to raise it to 1,000-foot for all indoor grows. California's San Mateo area has a 600-foot setback from. Okay. Thank you. The Borough Code allows these limited facilities to come into compliance within 90 days, which happens to be the same time that Anchorage Municipality reviews their cultivation use permits. Please don't allow them to have to pre-existing non-conforming status. This code was written to allow you to accomplish that compliance. Many will fulfill the minimum setback requirements, and there are 15 that aren't even operating yet. Our planning commission resolution supports adding basic standards to ensure
Ma'am,
proper
let's-
setback.
Let's wrap it up, please.
I will. Thank you. You should have received a North Lake Community Council letter in support of this, as well as another council letter in supporting adding limits. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Any other telephonics? Next telephonic caller, please.
Martin Brown. I'd like to address the setback policy. I believe that it's too stringent, and we all voted on this ordinance to allow marijuana to be legalized and regulated, just like alcohol. And the funny thing is you can build a brewery on a lot and not have the setbacks that you have the cultivation. If a smell from a cultivation is a problem, then that needs to be addressed with the cultivation itself. But to penalize all cultivations because of one or two is not proper. And I believe that the state setbacks are sufficient, and the borough doesn't need to make it more strict to have a cultivation in the valley. I own 2 limited cultivations. I employ 6 full-time people and a few part-time people. And I have not had one complaint, and my business has been in business since 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Next telephonic caller, please.
Jonathan S. G-U-E-S-T. I would like to echo the voice of Joe McEnany and keep our small-time growers about. I'm a retail owner here in the Valley, and have a quality product. It's to be ashamed that the borough would just hamper the.
Martin, do you happen to have us on speakerphone? Because we can barely hear you.
Are you still there with us? Are you still with us? Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Is he still with us? Can you hear us here from the assembly room? Okay. That caller was just on with us. Why don't you call back in, please? And then hit *3. Next, is there any more telephonics? Can you call back in to us? Martin, okay. Anybody on the audience wish to speak to this? Hang on a second, let's wait and see if we get a caller. Is he back with us on telephone? Okay, sir, you're up.
My name is Anthony Delarm. I own a small cultivation. It is 497 square feet. My daughter works for me. My brother does work for me, my oldest brother, and my son works for me. Like someone said, they're family-oriented businesses. I'm 64 feet from a driveway. I'm, I think, 124 feet to the road. What I'm getting at is, you look at a normal business, they're 36 feet. You look at anything that's outside of the realm, $800 a pound for taxes. This last month, I'm $5,600 roughly in taxes. I've been up to around $9,000 in taxes a month. What I'm getting at is these businesses are profitable. They work, they're good for family, they're good for business, they're good for economy. On a regulatory business, I had to sign up, I had to go through every qualifications there is for a normal standard business because I'm on a 2-story building. I did my top story of my garage. So I went through everything that I had to do, and I'm limited to the max. And I pay the highest out in taxes in the country for any type of business. And if you put it in perspective, what we're paying out is extremely high. It's the highest that they pay. So what I'm getting at is we're doing it and we're making things work. We're paying bills and we're making life happen. And so you think about what we're doing, it's easy and it's simple. And so if you create a larger thing, people like myself and my family wouldn't even be able to stay in business. We wouldn't be able to get the setbacks. Right now, like I said, it was a tough struggle just to get where we are. Costly on top of it. I think I probably got about $250,000 out of my pocket just to make this happen. And I'm into a year of business and I'm still not even paid. But what I'm getting at is we're living. And then on top of that, I just want to say one more quick thing. If I don't get off track, is the ordinance should be separated for one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. This shouldn't be strictly put on one side in a combo unit. Outside of that, regulatory things as smell, somebody brought up a smell factor. We have to test our smell, walk around our building on a regulatory business, just like anything else would. We have 0 problems in a year, have no calls, no nothing. And if you run your businesses like they're supposed to be ran, there is no issues. And I've been in business now for 30 years, self-employed. I ran a carpenter business for 25 years. So if there's an issue, we take it upon the business owners and we deal with it. And things like this, we talk about it, we figure out what's right and wrong. And that's all I really want to say, just give you my opinion and what a small cultivator is really doing and what it's like. It's not easy, but we're living, and it does make things change. So thanks for your time and have a good day.
Thank you. Any more telephonic? Okay, let's go back to the telephonic, please. Do we have a caller?
Hi, my name is Martin Brown. I'm the owner of 2 limited cultivations, and I'd like to address the setback policy of the cultivations. I believe that the borough setbacks right now are too strict, and to add the limiteds in with the standards for their setbacks. We had that at one point, and we got it changed, and now we want to add it back in again. I'm not sure I understand why, but I know that when we started this initiative and it was all voted on, we asked that marijuana be regulated like alcohol. And the funny thing is you can build a brewery on a lot with the 10 and 20 foot setback rules on the property line, but a cultivation has to have a 100-foot setback. I don't understand that. But if there's a smell issue, the state does have regulations. And because somebody might have a smell issue, you shouldn't penalize everybody because of that. Deal with this one business or the 2 businesses that have the smell issue and, leave the rest of us alone. I have, like I said, 2 limited cultivations. I employ 4 full-time employees and a couple of part-time employees. And I haven't had any problems. And I've been in business since 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other telephonic? Okay, we have one more telephonic. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, my name is Caleb Saunders. My last name is Saunders. I'm calling. I wanted to echo that I believe this is actually 2 separate subjects. It's more about on-site consumption, where we could talk about parking requirements and hours of operations. I believe that warrants its own discussion, as well as the limited cultivations. I think there's a lot going on, especially with the limited cultivations. I kind of would love to go back to just thinking about the comments that have been made. You can hear how the people that are in opposition and say that there's many smell complaints. If you were to go look up the scenario, because I do remember this, I've been in every single meeting, these over 100 complaints are made by the same few people that live right next to a cultivation, and they have been constantly for the last year trying to get this thing shut down. They do not like it. When AMCO comes out,
for these over 100 smell complaints, and they find that there is no smell, these people continue to harass this company, this business, our industry, with a false claim of smell that is non-existent. And you can hear how they are not trying to protect anyone. She was asking that you guys do not allow for businesses that exist to be grandfathered in. That's not what she's looking for. They are looking to punish these businesses, to shut them down because they have not found a way yet. And this would give them an opening to allow them to harass our industry and get more of these businesses shut down based off of nothing. If there were smell complaints and there was a problem, AMCO would have fined these people, but they have not. So again, I just kind of want to go back to that this has become a much larger issue when it could just be, I mean, we're already trying to add more. It's going to add more to the borough. It's going to add more money for us to use. It seems, like I'm saying, that this should be two separate conversations because already I feel overwhelmed and that there isn't enough time for me to talk about both of them. But I just want to leave it with that, and thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any more telephonic? Okay, we have another caller. Go ahead, please. Do we have another caller? Anyone on the telephone wants to speak to the assembly on this ordinance?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. State your name, please.
Hi, my name is Becky Stope, and I'm calling from Wasilla, and I'm calling to speak in opposition to allowing on-site consumption of marijuana in retail facilities. Allowing on-site consumption would weaken Alaska's current smoke-free state law and the protections that are provided in that law against secondhand smoke. So I worked for 8 years in tobacco prevention and control, 5 of those years at Alaska Family Services and 3 at the American Lung Association. We worked really hard on getting the state law passed. I'm currently not working in that field, but spent a lot of time advocating for that policy and the workplace protections and protecting the public from secondhand smoke. And secondhand marijuana smoke is just as harmful. It contains many of the same harmful chemicals that are found in secondhand tobacco smoke and presents the same health implications. Also, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers has found that there is no ventilation system that is strong enough to remove secondhand tobacco smoke or marijuana smoke from an environment. So again, those workplace protections were hard fought over many years to get the state law passed, and allowing on-site consumption of marijuana would weaken that law, and I don't believe that there should be an exception for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further telephonic? No more telephonic? Mr. Haberman? Does anybody else wish to speak after Faith?
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. Now, I was present at the Planning Commission in addressing this subject matter. And initially, I like to bring out the two key words, administrative permit and conditional use permit. What does that mean to you? Do you realize that administrative permit end result is, where's the public hearing at the Planning Commission? That's what that means. Now, the Planning Commission understood my concerns respectfully, and I was glad to see it. Large number there. But somehow, Planning Department Director Alex Strong put his 2 cents in, and it changed, and we got something like this. Now, let's go on the other issue. On-site consumption, because I think you got to seriously take a look at that, those words, on-site consumption. The borough's not ready for that scenario. The industry, pretty much, as you heard, and members of the industry tonight, are not calling for it. So why do you have it here? Good point. And also, Anchorage Assembly and Municipality of Anchorage. I don't recall them going into that direction. Discussing it, yes, and they really discussed this issue. But as far as this issue here, you can't go forward with it. Also on the issue which was addressed by a few people prior to me, you should divide the question, retail and cultivation. That is relevant here. Should have been done. But this mishmash, and the most important thing, if you, assembly members, and the public expect to hear the public speak, you don't run through this kind of garbage, particularly when the state's not ready for an on-site consumption issue. It's not ready for that scenario. You're doing a disservice. Nowhere in the document to say that it's proven safety-wise that you can do this and approve this thing on on-site consumption. That's why, where else in the state are you seeing that? Anywhere in the state. And I'll close with these remarks too. The hands in dealing with the marijuana issue should be taken away from the Planning Commission and should be dealt with the Borough Assembly. Why do I say that? That is what happens in Anchorage. And they are really involved with the issue. But hidden away among the Planning Commission, which does not conduct meetings appropriately, far from it, and is disrespectful by the chair, you need to remove that scenario away and bring it back to right in the front line. And you need I'll close with this last word, the more complex and complicated issue is, the more noise, the more opportunity the public heard. And one public hearing on this thing should not be allowed, just one, more so. Thank you. Kill it.
Ma'am? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Sarah Lorimer, and my sister and I recently opened up a retail facility in Palmer, Alaska. Out of the 10 cultivators, we do have 5 that come from a limited cultivation. These are all small business owners. These are all people that are trying to get into the space. I'm sitting next to one of the cultivators that already spoke today, Tony, and a lot of these are family-run businesses. This is their entry point into starting a cultivation business. This setback will greatly affect their opportunity to do that. My sister and I are actually in the process of starting our own limited cultivation to help supply our retail store. I have personally ran my own business for 15 years and have now got into the marijuana space because of the benefits we've seen that it's actually making in the community. I'm very involved in the community. I'm very involved in Palmer. I'm very involved with everybody that's around. And we look to continue to do that. And I think requiring these setbacks, I'd like to just see the ordinance broken into 2 different pieces, just like everyone else said. I'm not against either one, but I think more discussion is necessary in regards to the on-site consumption. On-site consumption does not mean just smoking marijuana. On-site consumption can mean also edibles. There's things that cannot harm the people that work in those spaces. So there's lots of other things to explore. I think that we're a little bit premature in putting those 2 together. And I ask that you do divide those up and you do have some more public discussion on this, because obviously people are coming out, whether it be from the industry, for or against either one of these topics. But the retail space and the cultivation space should definitely be divided into 2 separate ordinances. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more telephonic? Anyone else in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, but before I have Sumner move this legislation, there was an allegation of a conflict, so Mr. Sumner, now you go ahead. Do you think you have a conflict?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it was said that marijuana facility was adjoining my house. It is true that a marijuana facility was permitted basically adjoining my house, or the lot over across the street. It is not true that I own that house anymore. I sold it. So I don't know that, and I sold it for substantially more than I ever thought I would, I might add. So I don't know that would be a grounds for recusal, but I'll leave that up to you.
No rule, there is no conflict since you sold that land. I'm glad you made a lot of money.
Certainly, and tax-free
Okay,
after
would
2
you go ahead
years.
and move this legislation, please?
Yeah, so I move to adopt, ordinance 21-017. And I suppose I'll speak to it if I can go first. So there's been a number of folks from industry that I think a lot of them were limited cultivation facility owners that I think really misunderstand this ordinance and misunderstand, I think, well, this ordinance would actually give them a legal non-conforming status, whereas in the absence of this ordinance, there is nothing that would prevent a future assembly from simply outright banning or adopting standards and then requiring and not permitting a legal non-conforming status, which could result in them being shut down. And I might add that I think in a long enough time span, as these facilities go into neighborhoods and around schools, you'll get eventually more and more regulatory pushback. And there will be, at some point, I think, a push that will not be resisted to go that direction. So I think this actually protects the industry. It's not going to shut down anybody that is in operation or even anybody that has initiated their application by February 2nd. So it's not true that this is shutting anybody down. It is true that it would prevent a new limited cultivation facility within 1,000 feet of school grounds, and there will be certain setbacks. But I think that long run, that's actually going to protect the industry as a whole. I might also add that as more and more competitors come on and margins collapse, eventually the same folks that are testifying against this would probably be testifying for it. But that being said, one of the biggest complaints I've had is the setbacks from schools. I've had North Lakes Community Council, I believe, sent me a resolution, and Tenina Community Council. I've been contacted by a number of constituents about concerns about setbacks from schools. So this does address that in part. Then let's see. Yeah, but since the bulk of the concern was about the limited facilities and being shut down, I mean, I would just point out it actually protects those facilities. Basically, they are at risk of being shut down absent a legal non-conforming status. So, thank you.
Ms. Bovee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for the attorney based on something that Assemblymember Sumner said. So wouldn't currently licensed limited cultivation facilities be grandfathered in and protected from future assembly action? I mean, his argument is basically we're protecting them, but could we go back after could someone go back after the effect and take away their right to exist?
Yes. I mean, by putting it into code, it might make it a little more complicated. But yes, it could be, because marijuana regulation is a unique character. It's kind of like alcohol regulation. Whenever you say, hey, a village voted themselves dry or a city voted themselves dry, nobody blinks an eye and says, well, what about the alcohol stores that are already there? So, you know, if something changed and the voters of the Mat-Su Borough decided we don't want marijuana anymore, because there is the local option to do that, everyone's permits go away. There is no grandfather permits for alcohol or marijuana because of the nature of the way the laws are written.
So would this in effect protect them?
Well, it would
Or
potentially.
would they still be
I mean, potentially it would
vulnerable?
protect them because it's putting into the code that the marijuana cultivation facilities that exist or have initiated a license application shall have pre-existing legal non-conforming status notwithstanding section C of this section. And it basically says that they don't have to come get a determination, although they can if they want to. So there is a degree of protection put into the code because it would require an assembly ordinance then to then remove that from the code rather than some kind of administrative action. Again, it all goes out the window if voters take up the issue.
Okay, Mr. Hale?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that we have the planning commission bring this back to us as two separate ordinances, one for the retail facility and one for the cultivation facilities.
I think the assembly would do that, Mr. Hale. So you'd make a motion for the assembly to consider. Madam Clerk is here to advise you the exact wordage of that.
I just want to be clear on what you're wanting to do. Are you wanting it to go back to the planning commission, come forward as two separate ordinances, and then have them comment on it again? Is that your intent?
Not necessarily the planning commission, but to the planning department to craft two separate ordinances addressing these two clearly different issues, and then bring those ordinances back to the assembly.
There's one of two ways you can do that. You'd have to postpone this and request it come back as two different ordinances. The problem is we have ordinance numbers and they have been advertised. It makes it a little bit more difficult, not undoable, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. Or you could choose to fail this and require that it come back as two separate ordinances.
Well, I guess I would. So I was thinking of postponement until they could rewrite, like a postpone indefinitely until they could rewrite it and bring it back as two ordinances. Would that satisfy the requirements?
Yes, it would, Assemblymember Hale.
So the motion was to
And that's
postpone.
what I would like to move.
I object.
Just a second. Madam Clerk, what was the motion?
The motion is postponed indefinitely with the direction to have this legislation come back as two separate ordinances.
Okay. Everybody got the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Okay, Mr. Sumner?
I object. I would like to have a vote on the main motion rather than always delaying and putting off things. We could reject this and it could be brought back as separate things, but I want to vote on the main motion, not a
Okay, so
postpone.
you're opposed to this motion to postpone indefinitely. Anybody else want to speak to this? Mr. Yount?
I guess I'm not really sure who I'm speaking to here on either one of these. I apologize. I just step out and use the restroom, but I think we've heard a lot of valid points tonight, and the Matsu Borough is known for, and I hope continues to be known for, being a very business-friendly environment. These are all great businesses, small albeit, but that's the foundation to our economy. I have some questions, maybe that Mr. Our planner could answer, like sound. It's so easy to test for sound. And I don't understand the science behind smell, but can it be tested for accurately, scientifically at a property line, right? Those are questions that I have. It's not fair to punish one business or say 9 or 10 responsible businesses for one irresponsible business. We should deal with that irresponsible one. So I've said this in the past, and I'm not picking on anybody, but a rushed government is a failed government. And so we've heard a lot of valid arguments tonight. I could see a reason why to postpone this
Okay.
until we can
On the motion to
answer those
postpone.
questions.
Ms. Nowers? Postpone indefinitely. Everybody understands what that's going to do to this ordinance. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, I would support postponing indefinitely just because it captures better how I feel about this right now. I really don't feel like I want to vote up or down like normally. Last time I agreed with you, Assemblymember Sumner, but postpone more accurately captures how I feel about this, that there really are two separate issues and some issues within those two separate issues to be worked out. So I will vote in favor of postponing and bringing back as two.
Okay, anyone else? I believe there is objection. Anyone want to call a question? Mr. McKee calls the question. Any objection to the call of the question and voting on this? So Mr. Sumner, you are objecting to passing this? Okay, So vote on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Yes or no?
So yes to postpone and no not to.
Assemblymember Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Sumner 2 and McKee opposed. It passed. Assemblymember Hale voted yes.
So the motion to postpone indefinitely
Pass.
has passed.
Yes.
Okay.
By indefinitely, I don't want, and I don't think any of these people that came and spoke tonight and took their time out of their day want this to go forever, right? I think that you guys would agree that we should probably ask Mr. Strong to bring this back up and let's work through these bugs so everybody has an understanding of what direction we're headed in. I hope it doesn't get shelved forever, is what I'm saying. Let's be.
Well, I'll let the manager, Mr. Brown, talk to Alex Strong, Director Strong, and basically, I guess they'll split it and bring it back. Is that, Mr. Manager? Yes. Okay. So we're finished with that for right now. Pardon?
I will not support bringing this back as a split amendment, so somebody else will have to bring that.
Sounds like Mr. Hale. So this motion. Audience participation. This is your.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I guess we woke you up, remember? You get with Mr. Brown on these ordinances. Mr. Sumner is not going to sponsor them from now on.
Roger that.
Okay. We have reached audience participation. If this is your opportunity to speak to the assembly on any topic you wish. If you are telephonic and would like to speak to the audience or to the assembly, please hit *3. You will hear your hand has been raised. Then go ahead. Everybody has 3 minutes. Anybody in the audience here want to speak? Okay, ma'am. Pardon? Oh, I got Jessica. I had you on the sign-up list. I just wasn't paying attention.
I didn't realize there was an ordinance with the same number when I
Right.
signed up. All right, I am Jessica Vieira, the Executive Director of the Greater Wasilla Chamber of Commerce, speaking in support of Resolution 21-017. Each year, the Wasilla Chamber Government Affairs Committee drafts a list of legislative priorities to focus on for the year. Every year, as far back as we have created that list, local control has been a key part of that list. We have long seen the state impose population limits on alcohol licenses as a barrier to business and something that should rest in the hands of a municipality to decide how they can handle it best. After all, Wasilla voted to go wet. If Golcana can vote to be dry and prohibit alcohol possession, sale, and consumption with the full support of the state, then why, if Wasilla has voted to be wet, are we told by the state that we're only allowed to be damp by means of limiting the number of licenses we are allowed to have? In the Matsu Borough, we don't dwell in the city centers, but the city centers are where we gather to eat, to drink, to work, and to celebrate our communities. So by telling the city of Wasilla that their licenses are limited by the number of people within their city limits, when the greater Wasilla area population is 5 times or more, and that population fully relies upon city services and amenities, you create barriers to business and restrict the free market. Wasilla has done an amazing job of attracting business. We are the retail hub of the valley and can boast many great places to eat and activities to partake in as well. But we're starting to hit walls, those barriers to business. The biggest of which is the inability to access additional liquor licensing, from beer and wine licenses to full pour and package store licenses. Matsu Borough is one of the only areas in the state still growing, and by a large margin. While most of the state is experiencing an increasing trend of outward migration, we're growing by leaps and bounds. New businesses, new amenities, but we're lacking a few things. We have few new restaurants, few new chain restaurants, no new bars, no warehouse stores, no new box stores. And why? We don't control our own destiny. Without access to the proper licensing, they won't come here. And sure, we don't need more big chains, but if we can't get big chains who can afford the secondary market price of a liquor license, neither can your neighbor. Your neighbor can't follow their dream of opening a restaurant or opening a bar or a sports bar or anything that relies upon alcohol for additional income or success. In a state concerned with outward migration, any barrier to business is a problem. If we cannot continue to grow our basic amenities such as breweries, pubs, restaurants, wineries, and a Costco for that matter, we lose our appeal to those looking to relocate as well as to visitors. I want to see Wasilla and the Mat-Su Borough thrive and not struggle under arbitrary state regulations designed for the worst actors without consideration of others. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else wish to speak to the assembly? Miss, any telephonics? Okay. Our first telephonic caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, Kirby Coleman here. I would like to just stand in support for this resolution. That being said, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. You win the brevity contest tonight. Our next telephonic caller, please.
Yeah, this is Caleb Saunders, last name Saunders. I would love to kind of echo some of the representative of the Chamber of Commerce, and as she was speaking about the licenses for alcohol and how difficult and how straining that could be and how it can start to choke out businesses. I would warn of the just same thing coming with the cannabis industry, and to not allow for license caps, because you can see how it creates a secondary market and starts to choke others out. As somebody who has been able to achieve at least some small success with my cannabis business, I look to open other businesses. I want to have a ice cream store. As she's saying, the valley is growing, and I would love to take on opportunity of that because I live here in the valley. I want to be able to shop at new restaurants, at new stores. I want to see our valley grow, and we won't be able to do that without supporting the businesses that are the foundation of our economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further telephonic? No further telephonic? Mr. Haberman, you're going to set a record tonight. 8 times up here. Oh, 7, excuse me.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Mat-Su Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. I like to take the words that were said a few minutes ago by Assemblymember Yount. The Mat-Su Borough is known for being a business-friendly environment. Very good words. Unfortunately, they're not consistent with the words that were said at the 4 o'clock meeting dealing with the school bond debt. Toward the end of the meeting, if anyone wants to look at the tape, that were not connected. There were words that sounded more like a trade war between Anchorage and the Valley. As a remedy in how you work those words, proposals, in dealing with how you're going to sell to the Valley and how you're going to sell to Anchorage. I'd like to remind you, is I don't think of myself first as a Valley resident, although I've been here for a few decades. I think first, I'm an Alaskan. I think in my work, I think of how it's going to help everyone in our state. That should be what we should all do. But even before that, we should think as part American, we should be thinking about how it affects the whole country and go further, how our participation affects the whole planet and what we do. But the language before, unfortunately, was laughter in response to those words of encouraging a trade war. And I'd also like to remind you too, that a good portion of the Valley earns their bread and butter, by working in Anchorage. We do not need that direction. Also, words that were said previously, not at this meeting, but I heard in the news clips from the current mayor in Wasilla that we're open for business. Well, with all due respect, we're not really open for business so long as we look and not follow with responsibility in dealing with COVID. Until we deal with that issue responsibly, we're not going to fully open for business. But what we see is, I think, not going to Fred Meyer's in Wasilla, I'm more likely to go to Fred Meyer's in Palmer for more safety because of what's happened out there. And it's more Wild Wild West in Wasilla than anywhere else in the valley. And the people who I talk to in Anchorage, business people, when they do come up here, they're in shock. They're in shock to how we've handled the COVID issue. And the pretension that we have sign outside in the doors that says mask required, and even the borough manager, good part of the last meeting, did not wear a face covering. What message that is said? And then in closing, more than 50% of the people who attended the last borough assembly meeting did not wear a face covering. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cottle, do you want to speak? I have good news for you too, Mr. Cottle. Nothing's been pulled from the consent agenda.
I just wanted to go last, so I could go last. My name is Bert Cottle, a resident of the Valley. So on the consent agenda is 21-017. I'm here to support that. I know it's still on the consent agenda. That's Machiki's bill, Senator Machiki's bill on Senate Bill 9. That's been in the Senate trying to get out of there and be passed for 8 years. 8 years. A bad bill is a bad bill. And that boils down to 2 words, and that's local control. We've had the governor here within the last 60 days saying that we should have local control to have our own economic development, our own destination. You talked about it in your 4 o'clock meeting, what our local control is and what economic development would be to the borough. A bad bill is a bad bill. There's a reason it's been stuck in committees for 8 years. Take out the local control issue, and that would have already passed. Because everybody supports the education, everybody supports the enforcement of it, but local control has held that thing up. Take it out of there. The marijuana bill passed in less than 2 years. Less than 2 years, the marijuana bill passed because people accepted it. So there's a reason that bill is still hung up in there. We can vote to go damp, we can vote to go dry, and we can vote to go wet. We voted to go wet. All 3 cities did and the borough did, but now the state mandates on how wet we can be. We're either wet or not wet. So that should be a local control issue, and it's a taxation local issue on the local. All 3 cities, including the borough, have problems with the current and future population numbers. They're trying to increase the population numbers. You won't see another liquor permit in the valley, whether it's in the cities or the borough if this goes through. Take it out. You're talking about a borough the size of West Virginia. We should have our own local control. We should have a free market. We should have an open market. So I think where we need to stop it is, and we can stop it. It has, right now it's been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's 5 members on that committee. 2 of them live here in the borough. One senator represents Palmer, one represents Wasilla. They should be able to carry at least 1 more vote and kill this thing until that's fixed. Take out the local control, and then we can have that. So right now, if you look it up on the state website, Anchorage has 143 restaurant beer wine licenses. Why are we limited on them coming out here? That's a local issue. They also have 119 beverage dispensary license, which include Olive Garden and Texas Roadhouse. Why can't I have an Olive Garden out here? Why can't I have a Texas Roadhouse? So between the 2 of them, you're looking at 250, 300 licenses that we can't move out here. That's not fair. The control thing was written for rural Alaska, where you had state troopers. The cities and the boroughs have elected to be second class or first class. You have lobbyists here, tell them to do something. Okay, in the governor's office, hopefully he's still listening on the way home to Willow. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harris, did you hear that? Okay, good. Anybody else wish to speak? I think we've got everybody in this room so far. And any other telephonics? Okay, we'll close out audio participation. Madam Clerk, the consent agenda, please.
Resolution 21017, a resolution in support of changes to state law to allow for more local control over alcohol beverage licensing.
AM 2111, authorizing the borough manager to enter into a lease agreement for a communication tower site known as Montana Mountain with the Alaska State Department of Natural Resources Division of Mining, Land, and Water for a 10-year term with an option to renew for additional 10-year term. AM 21012, awarded bid number 21132B to Granite Construction Company in the contract amount of $152,715 for Grandview Road improvements. AM 21013, vacate the 50-foot wide section line easement along north boundary of proposed Lot 2, Bug Lake, property located just east of mile 111 West Glen Highway within section 25, township 20 north, range 10 east, Seward Meridian. AM 21014, vacated portion of a 50-foot wide public access easement upland from along the ordinary high water mark of Horseshoe Lake on lots 2, U.S. Survey 3519, reserved by a 2003 Borough Quit Claim Deed located in Section 12, Township 17 North, Range 4 West, Seward Meridian. AM 21015, authorization to enter into a utility reimbursable services agreement with the Alaska Railroad for the Abbey Boulevard Railroad Crossing major repair and upgrade in the amount of $342,263. And AM 21016, eliminate the 15-foot wide utility easement along the south boundary of Kellard Family Subdivision and relocate the easement adjoining new public right-of-ways to be dedicated on the Kellard Family Subdivision plat located in Section 6, Township 25 North, Range 4 West, Seward Meridian.
Councilmember Bovee, could you move that for us, please?
I move to approve the consent agenda as read into the record by the clerk.
Any objection? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. We have reached unfinished business. Madam Clerk, please read AM 20124.
Approval of the road service area road improvement project list, summer 2021.
Okay, this legislation is already before you. All of the AM has been adopted except for the Big Lake RSA number 21 project list. The only thing before the assembly is a project list for Big Lake RSA. Mr. Two?
So I move to amend AM 2124 for the Big Lake RSA project by decreasing line 3, calcium and/or cheaper dust control methods by $100,000 and increasing line 1, road reconstruction by $100,000. This will decrease calcium to $35,000 and increase road reconstruction by to $155,000.
Okay. Does everybody have that amendment? Okay, so you have it in writing. Discussion on the amendment Mr. Two just made. Good.
Okay, so this amendment, we've been working on it up here for a little while, and we postponed it, I believe, 2 times. And they gave me time to go back in front of the RSA board and talk to those folks about it, and also the Big Lake Community Council, talk to those folks about it, and I got overwhelming support at both of them. So, but I am glad that I had the opportunity to go talk to those folks and let them weigh in. But I was glad that I got huge support.
Okay. Okay, any objection to passing Mr. Two's changes and amendments? Ms. Bovee?
Yeah, it's my understanding that that was not the resolution passed by the RSA board and that they in fact wanted the entire 135,000 to be appropriated for road improvements with nothing for the calcium chloride. Is that correct?
Are you asking me?
Yes, please.
No, that's not, the wordage is calcium chlorides on the bottom of that, what you got from the, yeah, that piece of paper, look at the very bottom.
I'm gonna object, I guess. I don't see a specific amount for for dust control. It was my understanding that that conversation was still going to happen after additional meetings and possibly tours. Is that correct?
What's going to happen, Cam?
I'm just curious. This just says you're going to do some ride-arounds, or the RSA board is going to do some ride-arounds. Says a portion may be used for dust control, but the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 first resolved says to direct approximately 135,000 already appropriated to be replaced in the reconditioned roads account. So I guess I'm unclear as to why we're separating a portion of that out.
I was there at the RSA meeting. We had the biggest meeting that I've seen in 3 years. I would tell you that if you took all the people that went to the RSA meeting for the last 3 years, that probably didn't equal the amount of people that were there at that particular meeting. And what really stood out the most is that the RSA RIP list didn't reflect the desires of the community. That's what really came out of that meeting. And then the biggest portion of the folks wanted dust control. And then the second portion of the folks wanted to have their undrivable roads fixed. So I listened to the people, and this is what happened. They want dust control. There's $135,000 total. So I'd like to move the $100,000 to the roads so they can work on to recondition roads for the unpassable roads. And then I'd like to put $35,000 toward calcium.
Okay.
That's in the RSA that I talked to all the citizens, Tam.
Anything further? Mr. Summer?
I would just like to point out, he is the assembly member representing that RSA, so that, I mean, I do think we should give deference to that assembly member representing their RSA because they answered to the voters in that area, and you don't, none of us do, and it'll be that assembly member that will either be elected or not elected, so. I certainly wasn't at that RSA meeting, and if anybody else here was, then speak up, but.
Hey, Ms. Nowers, did you have something?
Just want to say I take notice when RSAs in my area are upset about things that are happening, primarily that they feel like their voice is being overridden at the last minute. So that seems to be what upset people in this, that there's a process that they think they understand, and now there's a new process taking place. And I'm just going, Mr. Tu, I'm just going by what has been submitted to us. So I'm having a hard time reconciling what they wrote, which is that they want the 135,000 to go to recondition roads, with what you're doing. So I just have what's in front of us, and I do respect that you are the assembly member for them, but what I have in front from the RSA for that area is different than what you're proposing.
Who was up next? Ms. Bovee, then Mr. Tu?
Yeah, actually a portion of RSA 21 is in District 7.
Mr. Tu?
I was at that RSA meeting, and I stood up and spoke in front of all the folks there. And I asked the question, who wants dust control? Raise their hand. And over half of the room raised their hand that they want dust control. The RSA board up there is one, that was the first day that one of the RSA persons, board members, ever attended a meeting. The other one, that was the second meeting that he ever attended. There was only one person there that attended any meetings in the past. So exactly how their paperwork came out, I'm telling you what the people wanted, and that's what they wanted, and I'm sticking to what I did.
Mr. McKee?
I called a question.
Okay, So it's $100,000 to road reconstruction and $35,000 to dust control. Any objection to calling the question is what I'm supposed to say. See no objection? Any objection to passing the amendment that Mr. Tu proposed? $100,000 to road construction. So Ms. Bovey's objecting, so Madam Clerk, the vote.
Vote for your amendment there, my man.
Assemblymember Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Nowers and Bovee opposed.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Now we're on the main motion of
Okay.
the Big Lake RSA list, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, the Big Lake RSA list, AM 2124. Any objection to passing the RSA list? It's been amended. Mr. Hale, you have any objection?
No objection.
Okay, no objection, seeing none here. That AM is passed as amended. There are 26 vetoes. No vetoes. Madam Clerk, introductions.
Introduction for public hearing on March 2nd is Resolution 21015 and Ordinance 21018 with accompanying Resolution 21014.
I move to introduce the legislation as read into the record by the clerk and set the public hearings for March 2nd, 2021.
Okay, any objection? Hearing none, that legislation is introduced and set for public hearing. Let's do the vacancy report, Ms. Bovee.
I move to confirm the mayor's recommendations as follows. Agriculture Advisory Board, Benjamin Swim. Borough Area Schools Site Selection Committee, resignation of Stephanie Nowers, Rob Yunt. Parks, Recreation, and Trails Advisory Board, John Harris. Moving Nicolette LaFleur from at-large 1 position to District 6 position. Plating Board, Barbara Doty. Fairview RSA number 14, John Harris.
Okay, is that you, Mr. Harris? Okay, Mr. Yacht is replacing Ms. Nowers on that. Is that okay? Any objection to the vacancy report? Hearing none, vacancy report is approved. There's no other new business, no referrals, no reconsiderations. So for the audience and everybody here, we have an executive session, which we're going to move into now. It's okay, any comments from any assembly members? Mr. Hale, any comments? I think it's pretty quiet down here.
No comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Assemblyman Bovee, would you please move us into executive session?
I move to enter into executive session for matters which the immediate public knowledge of would clearly have an adverse effect upon the finances of the borough and matters which by law, municipal charter, ordinances are required to be kept confidential, and to discuss matters involving consideration of borough records that by law are not subject to public disclosure, and discussion of matters subject to attorney-client privilege, in particular to discuss NPI potential litigation or resolution. Those in attendance for the executive session will be the mayor, the assembly, the manager, the attorney, the clerk, the finance director, the internal auditor, and the port operation manager.
Okay, any objection to enter an executive session? Hearing none, we will enter executive session at 8:14 PM. Off record. Okay. We're back on record. It's 9:15 PM, February 16th. Madam Bovee, could you take us out of executive session?
I move to exit executive session.
Any objection? Seeing no objection, we exit executive session at 9:16 PM. We adjourn at 9:16 PM.